Hello, I'm Dr. Louise, and this is Dr. Louise Thinks, a channel dedicated to helping everyday folks connect with the healing power of philosophy. Have you ever felt like your voice was ignored or dismissed simply because of who you are? I remember a time when I was at a doctor's office and I was trying to get some help with some persistent health issues. As a fat woman, I was ready for the usual, my concerns being brushed aside, and everything just being blamed on my weight. Sure enough, when I brought up my symptoms to my doctor, I was experiencing, the doctor barely listened before telling me that I just needed to lose weight. It didn't matter that I knew my body, or that I'd come in with concerns that had nothing to do with my weight. No matter what I said, it didn't count. I left that office feeling frustrated and invisible. I knew that my credibility had been undermined by nothing more than a stereotype about fat people. Experiences like this aren't just frustrating. They're part of a bigger problem that philosopher Miranda Fricker calls testimonial injustice. This occurs when someone is unfairly perceived as less credible due to a prejudice tied to their social identity. In this case, it wasn't just my concerns that were dismissed. It was that my identity as a fat woman led to an automatic assumption that my testimony wasn't worth trusting. Fricker's work helps us to understand how these moments are not just individual failings. They're part of a larger system of power and prejudice that shapes how we're heard and how we're valued. In this video, we'll explore her ideas about social power, identity power, and systemic prejudice, and how they impact whose voices are valued and heard and whose are silenced. Let's dive in. Social power is defined by Dr. Fricker as a practically socially situated capacity to control others' actions, where this capacity might be exercised, either actively or passively, by particular social agents. Or alternatively, it may operate purely structurally. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so let's break it down. At its core, social power is about your capacity to influence what other people do. Even when social power isn't actively used, the capacity for influence is always there. It's shaped by our social roles and our context. Sometimes we exert our ability to influence others in a very explicit way. Think of like a famous internet influencer reading an ad. And sometimes we influence people without doing anything intentionally. Instead, it's just by virtue of who we are and our position in society that we influence how people behave. For example, students may choose to be quiet in the classroom because the teacher is present, without necessarily being told to be quiet by the teacher. It's the teacher's social position combined with the context of the classroom that's influencing people's behavior. So sometimes as individuals, we actively exercise our social power, but sometimes social power operates in a structural way. In these situations, no single person is in control, but rather the system that we've collectively built influences people to behave a certain way. For example, disenfranchised groups might face structural barriers, like complicated voter registration or a history of exclusion, that lead them to believe that voting just isn't for people like them. In this way, the system itself influences the behavior. Now, there are different flavors of social power. One that's particularly important to Fricker's work is identity power. This type of power works in two different ways: through practical coordination, the way we interact in everyday life, and imaginative social coordination, which relies on shared ideas about social identities, like what it's like to be a man or a woman, or what it's like to be gay or straight. For example, gender identity power can be exerted both actively and passively. Imagine a man actively using his identity to influence a woman to defer to his opinion. This man might patronize her by saying, "Marge, there's female intuition and then there's facts." Alternatively, his identity power might be passive. Marge might hold back her real opinions because she feels societal pressure suggesting women should not be contradicting men. Interestingly, identity power can still shape our action, even if we don't agree with the stereotypes involved. As Fricker explains, the conceptions of different social identities that are activated in operations of identity power need not be held at the level of belief in either subject or object. For the primary modus operandi of identity power is at the level of collective imagination. Consequently, it can control our actions despite our beliefs. In other words, stereotypes don't have to be things that we believe in order to hold influence over us. They work at the level of collective imagination, shaping how we act without us even realizing it. For example, Marge might not believe that women should defer to men, but societal norms might still make her feel like she can't speak up. Now, identity power is crucial to understand because it plays a key role when two people are involved in something called testimonial exchange. This is just a fancy way of saying they're having a conversation where one person, let's call them the listener, is evaluating how credible or trustworthy the other person is. Let's say that's the speaker. When listeners make these evaluations, they often rely on social stereotypes or mental shortcuts, whether they realize it or not. Now, the problem arises when those stereotypes carry prejudices that work against the speaker. For instance, if the listener uses a stereotype that unfairly casts doubt on the speaker based on their identity, such as their gender, their race, maybe their age, the listener may judge them as less credible. This can lead to the listener dismissing what the person has to say, not because of the actual evidence or the reasoning that's been provided, but because of biased assumptions. And this is bad for both parties. For the speaker, it's an unfair dismissal of their ideas. For the speaker, it's an unfair dismissal, and it silences them in ways they don't necessarily deserve. For the listener, it's a missed opportunity to learn something true and valuable because they've let prejudice cloud their judgment. In an ideal world, when two people are talking, the listener would evaluate the speaker's credibility based solely on the evidence and reasoning the speaker actually provides. But in reality, both active and passive exertions of social power, like identity power, create outside influences that distort this evaluation. Miranda Fricker introduces the idea of testimonial injustice. This is a specific kind of injustice that occurs when someone is wronged in their capacity as knower. This happens when prejudice unfairly influences how a listener evaluates the speaker's credibility. By deciding that the speaker is unreliable and dismissing what they have to say, the listener has effectively denied their role as someone who can share knowledge. This is a serious harm because it prevents the speaker from fully participating in the exchange of ideas and robs the listener of the chance to engage with potentially valuable truths. Now, it turns out that testimonial injustice does not just exist in isolation. When they're linked together by a common prejudice, they form what Fricker calls systematic testimonial injustice. These injustices are rooted in tracker prejudices, biases that follow someone across multiple areas of life, such as their economic opportunities, their education, and their professional lives. You can think of it like this. If someone is unfairly judged as less credible because of their race, gender, or another aspect of their identity, that same prejudice might also influence how they're treated at the workplace, in school, or when applying for loans. It's as if the prejudice is following them, shaping how they're perceived and limiting their opportunities in a variety of different settings. Fricker emphasizes that identity prejudice, biases tied to someone's social identity, is the main type of prejudice behind systematic testimonial injustices. When a person's identity triggers these biases, they become vulnerable to many different kinds of injustices, not just in how their testimony is received, but in how they're treated in the broader system. Systematic testimonial injustices are especially important because they reveal how epistemic injustices that target people in their capacity as knower, is deeply connected to the larger framework of social justice. These instances highlight the ways in which prejudices don't just harm individuals in isolated moments, but operates as part of a larger system that perpetuates inequality across all of society. So, what have we learned today? We've explored the concept of social power, how it shapes our interactions, and the unique role identity power plays in influencing whose voices are heard and whose are silenced. We've seen how this leads to testimonial injustice, where prejudice unfairly undermines someone's credibility, and how it becomes even more harmful when linked to systematic patterns of injustice that follow people throughout all aspects of their lives. But why does this matter? Because these injustices don't just affect abstract ideas about fairness or truth, they impact real people every single day. Whether it's a woman's insights being dismissed in a meeting, a young person of color being disbelieved in courts, or marginalized groups being excluded from important conversations. Testimonial injustice silences voices that deserve to be heard. And when those voices are silenced, we all lose out on the opportunity to learn from their experiences and perspectives. Recognizing these patterns of epistemic injustice is the first step to challenging them. It's about becoming aware of our own biases, even the ones we don't consciously agree with. We need to recognize how these can shape the way that we listen to others, and how societal structures reinforce those biases in ways we might not even notice. This is just the beginning of our journey into Miranda Fricker's Epistemic Injustice. In this series, we'll continue in unpacking how injustices affect us, not just in our capacity as knower, but as thinkers and participants in the real world. We'll look deeper at how these ideas connect to our everyday lives, from navigating tough conversations to advocating for social change. So if you've ever felt dismissed, unheard, or doubted, and wondered why, this series is for you. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode, where we'll dive even deeper into these ideas and how they intersect with practical issues like trust, credibility, and justice. And until next time, stay curious, be thoughtful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.